The shotgun blast echoed through the small courthouse of Angels Camp, California, as Lydia Collins slammed the doors behind her, tears streaming down her face, the final notice of foreclosure clutched in her trembling hand. The year was 1876, and everything her father had built, the only home she had ever known, now belonged to Everett Blackwell, the coldest banker west of the Mississippi. Lydia stumbled down the courthouse steps, her black boots kicking up dust on the main street. The town bustled around her, oblivious to her world collapsing. Cowboys tipped their hats as they passed, miners headed to the saloon after a long day's work, and merchants called out their wares, all part of the symphony of Angels Camp that now felt like a cruel melody to her ears. 3 weeks, she whispered to herself. 3 weeks to vacate the only home I've ever known. Her father, Joseph Collins, had been dead for 6 months. The lung fever had taken him quickly. Too quickly for proper goodbyes or instructions on the mortgage he'd taken out to expand their small ranch the year before. The drought that followed had withered their crops and weakened their cattle. With mounting debts and dwindling income, Lydia had watched helplessly as her father's dreams slipped through her fingers like the dry California soil. "Miss Collins," a deep voice called from behind. Lydia turned to see Everett Blackwell himself, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the late afternoon sun. His tailored suit and gold pocket watch were stark reminders of the wealth he'd accumulated, much of it from foreclosing on struggling families like hers. "Mr. Blackwell," she replied coldly, wiping tears away with the back of her hand. "I just wanted to assure you that your father's property will be put to good use. Progress waits for no one in this territory." His thin lips curved into what might have been meant as a smile, but it never reached his eyes. "That land has been in my family for 15 years. My father built every inch of that house with his own hands. And now it belongs to the bank," Blackwell said matter-of-factly. "Business is business, Miss Collins, nothing personal." But it was personal. It was her life, her memories, her future. As Blackwell tipped his hat and walked away, Lydia felt a burning in her chest, not just sorrow, but determination. She might have lost the battle today, but she wouldn't go quietly. What she didn't notice was the tall cowboy leaning against the hitching post outside the general store, watching the entire exchange with intense interest. His name was Heath Anderson, and he'd just ridden into Angels Camp that morning. His sun-weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes followed both Lydia and the banker with quiet calculation. Lydia made her way to Harriet's boarding house, where she'd taken a small room after selling most of her belongings to make the last failed payment on the mortgage. The modest establishment was run by Harriet Wilson, a widow who had lost her husband in a mining accident 10 years prior, and now provided clean, affordable lodging for those passing through Angels Camp. "More bad news, dear?" Harriet asked as Lydia entered, noting her red-rimmed eyes and slumped shoulders. "It's official," Lydia replied, her voice hollow. 3 weeks to vacate the property." Harriet clicked her tongue sympathetically. "That Blackwell is colder than a snake's belly in January. Your father was one of the finest men in this town. Joseph Collins helped half the businesses here get their start. And not one of them could help me keep the ranch," Lydia said bitterly. "Times are hard all over, child. The droughts hit everyone." Harriet placed a comforting hand on Lydia's shoulder. "You'll stay here as long as you need. Your father would have done the same for me." Lydia nodded gratefully, then headed up to her small room. Once alone, she sank onto the narrow bed and pulled from her pocket the gold locket containing a tiny portrait of her parents on their wedding day. Her mother had died when Lydia was just 10, leaving her father to raise her alone. They'd built a good life together, hard but rewarding. Now, at 23, she was truly alone. She allowed herself 5 minutes of tears before straightening her shoulders. Crying wouldn't save her home. She needed a plan. The problem was, she had no money, few marketable skills beyond ranching, and limited options for a single woman in a frontier town. The next morning, Lydia rose with the sun, determined to make one last appeal to anyone who might help. She put on her best dress, a simple blue cotton affair that had belonged to her mother, and headed to the bank. Along the way, she noticed a commotion at Ferguson's saloon. A crowd had gathered to watch a poker game in progress. Through the swinging doors, she glimpsed a stranger, the tall cowboy she'd seen briefly the day before. He was seated at a table with several locals and appeared to be winning rather handily. Lydia pressed on to the bank, where she was promptly informed by Blackwell's assistant that the banker was unavailable and that the foreclosure was final. No exceptions, no extensions. Dejected, she walked back through town, pausing outside the telegraph office. Perhaps she could wire her mother's cousin in Sacramento for help. But pride stopped her. She barely knew the woman, and begging from strangers, even those connected by blood, seemed a step too far. As she stood contemplating her options, a voice spoke from behind her. "Excuse me, miss. You dropped this." Lydia turned to find the cowboy from the saloon holding her handkerchief. He was even taller up close, with sandy hair beneath his wide-brimmed hat and eyes the color of a summer sky. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and his hands were calloused from years of hard work. "I didn't drop anything," she said cautiously. The cowboy smiled, revealing straight white teeth. "No, you didn't. But I figured it was a more polite way to introduce myself than just walking up and saying hello. Heath Anderson, madam." He tipped his hat respectfully. Despite herself, Lydia felt a small smile forming. "Lydia Collins, I know." At her raised eyebrow, he added, "Small towns. Word travels fast about the banker's latest victim." Lydia's smile faded. "Is that what they're calling me, a victim?" "Not in those words, perhaps. But folks are talking about how Blackwell's taking your family ranch." Heath's expression was sympathetic, but not pitying. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with him yesterday." "Well, Mr. Anderson, unless you've got $300 to spare, there's nothing to be done about it." Lydia knew she sounded sharp, but pride was about all she had left. "Actually, Miss Collins, I might be able to help. I'm looking to put down some roots in these parts." "Been drifting too long." His eyes, direct and honest, met hers. "Maybe we could discuss it over coffee." Lydia hesitated. She'd had her fill of men making empty promises, but something about Heath Anderson's straightforward manner made her curious. "Coffee, then." "But I warn you, Mr. Anderson, if you're thinking of offering charity, I'm not interested." Heath grinned. "Wouldn't dream of it, Miss Collins. Business proposition only." They walked to the town's small cafe, where Heath pulled out a chair for her before seating himself. After ordering coffee, he leaned forward slightly. "I've been riding the trail for 8 years, Miss Collins. Started as a ranch hand in Texas, worked my way up to trail boss, saved every penny I could. Now I'm looking to settle, start my own spread." "And what does this have to do with my situation?" Lydia asked, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee mug. "I've been asking around town about available properties. Your family ranch came up." Heath took a sip of his coffee. 20 acres, solid house, good water source even in drought." "Sounds like exactly what I'm looking for." Lydia felt her chest tighten. Was he here to capitalize on her misfortune too? "The bank owns it now, Mr. Anderson. You should speak with Mr. Blackwell." "I plan to. But first, I wanted to hear about the place from someone who knows it best." His eyes were kind. "Tell me about your home, Miss Collins." And somehow, She found herself doing just that, describing the house her father had expanded 3 times as their fortunes grew. The creek that rarely ran dry even in the worst summers. The view of the foothills from the front porch where she and her father would sit on summer evenings. "It sounds like a fine piece of land," Heath said when she finished. "Your father built something special there." "Yes, he did," Lydia replied softly. "And now it's gone." Heath leaned back in his chair. "Not necessarily. What if I were to buy it from the bank and lease it back to you?" Lydia blinked in surprise. "Why would you do that?" "Because I need a good investment and you need a break," he shrugged. "And because I've seen how Blackwell operates. Men like him give honest businessmen a bad name." For the first time in months, Lydia felt a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by reality. "Even if you bought it, I couldn't afford to lease it. Not until I get the ranch producing again. We could work something out. Maybe you could show me the ropes of ranching in these parts." Different terrain from Texas. Heath's proposal seemed genuine, but Lydia had learned to be cautious. "Mr. Anderson, while I appreciate your offer, I hardly know you. For all I know, you could be worse than Blackwell." Heath laughed, a warm sound that drew the eyes of other patrons. "Fair enough, Miss Collins. Ask around town about me. I've been here 3 days and already beaten the sheriff at poker, outdrunk the blacksmith, and helped the widow Johnson fix her wagon wheel. I think you'll find I've made a decent impression." Despite herself, Lydia smiled. There was something refreshing about his confidence. "Tell you what," Heath continued, "you think about my offer. I'll go speak with Blackwell about purchasing the property. No commitment from you yet." It was a lifeline, however tenuous. Lydia nodded slowly. "All right, Mr. Anderson. I'll consider it." True to his word, Heath headed directly to the bank after their coffee. Lydia found herself wandering through town, asking discreet questions about the newcomer. The reports were consistently positive. He was fair at cards, generous with his winnings, respectful to the ladies, and seemingly flush with cash from his years as a trail boss. As the sun began to set, Lydia returned to the boarding house, her mind racing with possibilities. Could she trust Heath Anderson? Was this arrangement even practical? And why did her heart beat a little faster when she thought of his smile? Her contemplation was interrupted by a knock at her door. It was Harriet, looking excited. "That cowboy, Anderson, he's downstairs asking for you. Says he has news." Lydia smoothed her dress and hair before descending to the parlor, where Heath stood by the fireplace, hat in hand. His face broke into a smile when he saw her. "Miss Collins, I've had an interesting conversation with our friend Blackwell." "And?" Lydia asked, trying to keep the hope from her voice. "He was reluctant at first, tried to convince me the property wasn't worth my interest, but when I mentioned I had cash in hand." Heath's smile widened. Let's just say his tune changed considerably. Lydia's breath caught. "You bought it?" "Not yet, but we've agreed on terms." Heath stepped closer. "Miss Collins, Lydia, before I sign anything, I want you to be sure about this arrangement. If I buy this property, I want you to stay on, help me turn it into a working ranch again." "As your employee?" Lydia asked, uncertain. "As a partner," Heath clarified. "Your knowledge of the land, my capital and ranching experience. We split the profits once we're up and running." It sounded too good to be true. "Why would you offer such generous terms to a stranger?" Heath's expression grew serious. "Because I've been where you are. 10 years ago, my family lost everything to a banker not much different from Blackwell. I swore if I ever had the chance to prevent someone else from going through that, I would." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Still, Lydia hesitated. "I need to think about it. This is all happening very fast." "Of course. Take the night. I'll be finalizing the purchase tomorrow morning if you decide this arrangement works for you." After Heath left, Lydia paced her small room for hours. By dawn, she had made her decision. She found Heath at the cafe, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing papers. "I accept your offer, Mr. Anderson," she said without preamble, "but I want terms in writing." Heath's face lit up with a smile. "I wouldn't have it any other way. Shall we visit the lawyer before meeting Blackwell?" By noon, they had a contract drawn up that protected both their interests. As they entered the bank together, Lydia couldn't help but feel a flutter of satisfaction at Blackwell's surprised expression. "Miss Collins, I didn't expect to see you here," the banker said, his tone cool. "Miss Collins is advising me on the purchase," Heath replied smoothly. "After all, no one knows the property better." The transaction proceeded efficiently. Heath counted out $300 in gold coins, significantly more than the remaining mortgage, and Blackwell reluctantly signed over the deed. As they left the bank, Lydia felt dizzy with relief and disbelief. "I can't believe it happened that quickly." "Money talks, especially with men like Blackwell," Heath said, tucking the deed into his jacket. "Now, partner, would you like to show me our ranch?" The word "our" sent an unexpected thrill through Lydia. Together, they rode out to the Collins Ranch, now the Collins Anderson Ranch, as Heath had insisted on naming it. As they crested the hill overlooking the property, Lydia felt a surge of emotion. The small white farmhouse with its wraparound porch, the barn that needed a new roof, the fenced pastures where cattle should be grazing, it was all still there, still hers, at least partly. "It's beautiful," Heath said quietly. "Your father chose well. He always said it was the view that sold him, the mountains in the distance, the valley below." Lydia smiled at the memory. "He said a man could breathe here." They rode down to the house, and Lydia unlocked the door with the key she'd kept close despite the foreclosure. Inside, the rooms were just as she had left them, simple, clean, filled with memories. "I'll need to bring my things from the boarding house," she said, running her hand along the mantelpiece. "We can do that tomorrow," Heath replied. "For now, let's see what needs immediate attention." They spent the afternoon taking inventory. The house needed minor repairs. The barn roof would have to be replaced before winter, and the fences required mending in several places. The well was in good condition, and the soil, though dry from drought, was fundamentally sound. "We'll need to purchase cattle," Heath noted as they stood in the empty corral, "and hire a couple of hands. The Pearson brothers might be available," Lydia suggested. "They worked for my father before the drought forced him to let them go." Heath nodded approvingly. "Local knowledge. That's exactly why this partnership will work." As the sun began to set, they sat on the porch steps, watching the changing colors paint the mountains. "Why did you really do this, Mr. Anderson?" Lydia asked suddenly. "The truth." Heath was quiet for a moment. "When I rode into town and saw you arguing with Blackwell, something about your determination reminded me of my mother. She fought just as hard when we lost our place." He looked at his hands. "She didn't make it through the winter that followed. I was 16, had to make my own way after that." "I'm sorry," Lydia said softly. "It was a long time ago, but seeing you brought it all back." He met her eyes. "This isn't charity, Lydia. It's an investment in the land, in a partnership, and maybe in putting some old ghosts to rest." In that moment, looking into his open, honest face, Lydia felt something shift inside her, a wall beginning to crumble. "Then we'll make it work, Heath," she said, using his first name for the first time. "For both our sakes." The next day, they moved Lydia's few belongings from the boarding house and began the process of bringing the ranch back to life. Heath hired the Pearson brothers as hands and purchased tools and supplies from the general store. Word spread quickly through Angel's camp that the Collins Ranch had been saved by the newcomer, and several townspeople rode out to offer help or simply to satisfy their curiosity about the arrangement. Among them was Blackwell himself, arriving unannounced one afternoon while Lydia and Heath were replacing broken porch boards. "Quite the cozy setup you two have arranged," the banker remarked, not bothering to dismount. "I must say, Miss Collins, you landed on your feet rather fortuitously." Before Lydia could respond, Heath straightened up, his expression neutral but his eyes hard. "Did you need something, Blackwell? We're rather busy here." "Just checking on my investment. The bank still holds mortgages on most of the surrounding properties." Blackwell's smile was thin. "I always like to keep an eye on developments." "The deed's paid in full," Heath replied. "Your business with this property is concluded." Blackwell's smile faded. "Indeed. Well, I wish you luck. You'll need it with the drought conditions." He tipped his hat. "Good day to you both." As he rode away, Lydia gripped the porch railing tightly. "He's hoping we fail." "Of course he is," Heath said calmly. "Men like him can't stand to see others succeed where they predicted failure. Makes them feel less powerful." "What if he's right? What if the drought continues and we can't make this work?" Heath placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we adapt. Ranching isn't just about following old patterns, Lydia. It's about reading the land, understanding what it needs, what it can give." His confidence was infectious, and over the following weeks, Lydia found herself believing in their chances more and more. They worked from dawn till dusk, repairing, planning, preparing for the cattle that would arrive once the corrals and barn were ready. They developed a comfortable routine. Heath would rise first and start the coffee, and Lydia would prepare breakfast. They would discuss the day's tasks over the meal, then work separately or together as needed. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, planning and talking until the stars came out. Lydia learned that Heath had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed. He discovered that she had a talent for numbers and an encyclopedic knowledge of local plants. Their partnership began to flow smoothly, built on mutual respect and growing trust. It was during one of these evening conversations, about 3 weeks after Heath's purchase of the ranch, that Lydia realized something had changed between them. They were discussing the possibility of diversifying beyond cattle, perhaps adding sheep or expanding the vegetable garden, when she found herself watching the way the lamplight played across his features, highlighting the small crow's feet at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. "Lydia." Heath's voice broke into her thoughts. "You seem miles away." "Sorry," she said, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time." Heath nodded, his expression thoughtful. "For the better, I hope. Definitely for the better." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Heath. Not just for saving the ranch, but for making me feel like a partner, not a charity case." "You are a partner," he replied simply. "The best one I could have hoped for." The sincerity in his voice made something flutter in her chest. Before she could respond, a rumble of thunder sounded in the distance. "Rain." Lydia stood, peering at the horizon where clouds had gathered, barely visible in the gathering darkness. Heath joined her at the porch railing, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Looks promising." They watched as lightning flickered among the distant clouds. The air grew heavy with anticipation, carrying the unmistakable scent of coming rain. "Should we secure anything?" Lydia asked, suddenly practical. "I'll check the barn doors and equipment," Heath said. "You make sure the house windows are latched." They hurried about their tasks as the wind began to pick up, carrying dust and leaves in swirling eddies. Lydia had just secured the last window when the first heavy drops began to fall. She rushed to the porch just as Heath emerged from the barn, and they watched in wonder as the rain intensified, drumming on the roof and transforming the parched earth. "It's really coming down," Lydia laughed, feeling almost giddy as the raindrops splashed her outstretched hand. First real rain in months, Heath agreed, his smile wide. Good timing, too, just as we're getting ready for the cattle. They stood side by side, watching the downpour nourish the thirsty land. Without thinking, Lydia reached for Heath's hand. He threaded his fingers through hers, the simple contact sending warmth through her despite the cooling air. When she finally looked up at him, the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Heath leaned down. Their lips met in a gentle kiss that felt like both a question and an answer. When they parted, Lydia found herself speechless, her heart racing. Heath's expression was tender but uncertain. "I didn't plan this," he said quietly. "When I bought the ranch, I mean." "I know," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Neither did I." They watched the rain together until it slowed to a gentle patter, neither feeling the need to define what had just happened between them. It was enough for now to acknowledge the possibility. The rain continued intermittently for 3 days, blessing the land with much-needed moisture and filling the creek to levels not seen in over a year. When it finally cleared, the ranch seemed transformed, the grass already showing hints of green, the air fresh and clean. With renewed energy, they completed the final preparations for the cattle. Heath rode to a neighboring county where the drought had been less severe and returned with 30 head of prime stock, a modest beginning, but enough to establish their operation. As summer transitioned to fall, the ranch began to prosper under their joint care. The Pearson brothers proved reliable hands, and a local boy named Tommy was hired to help with daily chores. The cattle thrived on the rain-refreshed pastures, and Lydia's expanded vegetable garden yielded enough to supply their table and sell the excess in town. Their personal relationship developed alongside the ranch, growing naturally from partnership to friendship to something deeper. They were careful to maintain propriety. Heath moved into the small cabin that had once housed ranch hands, despite Lydia's assurance that the house was large enough for them both without causing scandal. "Time enough for that when things are more settled," Heath had said with a smile that promised future possibilities. They established a new routine that included Sunday dinners with the hands and occasional trips into town for supplies and social gatherings. The townsfolk, initially suspicious of their arrangement, gradually accepted them as a unit. If there was gossip about the nature of their relationship, it was generally good-natured. Even Blackwell seemed to have accepted the situation, though he remained coldly formal whenever they encountered him in town. His prediction of their failure had been proven wrong, and the banker was not a man who easily forgot being contradicted. One crisp October morning, Lydia was preparing breakfast when Heath entered the kitchen looking unusually serious. "Everything all right?" she asked, noting the papers in his hand. "I've been thinking," he began, taking a seat at the table, "about our arrangement." A flutter of anxiety passed through her. "What about it?" "It's working well, better than I hoped, actually, but there's something I need to make right." He placed the papers on the table. "This is the deed to the ranch, amended to include your name, equal ownership officially." Lydia stared at the document, stunned. "Heath, this isn't necessary. Our agreement was fair, but this is right." His eyes met hers steadily. "This was your home before it was mine, Lydia. It should be yours again legally." With trembling fingers, she picked up the deed, seeing her name alongside his in legal script. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just sign where indicated and we'll file it with the county clerk next time we're in town." Lydia felt tears welling in her eyes. "Why now?" Heath took a deep breath. "Because I want everything between us to be clear and honest before I ask you something important." Her heart began to race as he moved from his chair to kneel beside her. "Lydia Collins, these past months have been the happiest of my life." I came to Angel's Camp looking for land, but I found a home, and that home is wherever you are." He took her hand in his. "I'm asking if you'd consider making our partnership permanent in every way. Will you marry me?" Joy bloomed in Lydia's chest, expanding until she could barely breathe. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Heath Anderson, I will marry you." He rose and pulled her into his arms, their kiss sealing the promise between them. When they finally parted, both were laughing and crying at once. "I have something for you," Heath said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small gold ring set with a modest diamond. "It was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he passed, said to save it for the right woman." As he slipped it onto her finger, Lydia felt the weight of history and hope combined. "It's beautiful." "She would have loved you," Heath said softly. "Strong, smart, not afraid of hard work or speaking your mind." "When should we tell everyone?" Lydia asked, admiring how the ring caught the morning light. "How about today?" "We could ride into town, file the deed, and announce our engagement all at once." Lydia grinned. "I'd like that, and I have a special errand in mind while we're there." Later that morning they rode into Angel's Camp together, the amended deed safely tucked in Heath's saddlebag. Their first stop was the county clerk's office, where they filed the paperwork making Lydia co-owner of the ranch. Next, they visited the church, where they spoke with Pastor Thomas about a December wedding. As they emerged from the church, Lydia steered them toward the bank. "There's something I need to do," she explained when Heath raised an eyebrow. Blackwell looked up in surprise when they entered, his expression souring slightly at the sight of them. "Miss Collins, Mr. Anderson, what brings you to the bank today? Not financial troubles, I hope." The false concern in his voice was thinly veiled. "Quite the opposite," Lydia replied pleasantly. She removed an envelope from her reticule and placed it on his desk. "This contains the money my father initially borrowed from your bank, plus interest." Blackwell frowned. "The debt was settled when Mr. Anderson purchased the property." "Yes, it was. This isn't about the debt." Lydia's smile remained fixed. "This is about honoring my father's intentions. He borrowed this money to improve the ranch, and now that the ranch is prospering again, I want his name cleared of any suggestion that he didn't repay what he owed." The banker opened the envelope, counting the bills inside with practiced fingers. "This appears to be in order," he acknowledged reluctantly. "I'll mark the Collins account as settled in full." "Thank you." Lydia hesitated, then added, "Mr. Blackwell, my father always taught me that a community thrives when its members support each other through hard times. Perhaps if the bank were to show more flexibility during droughts and other hardships, you'd find that most people will honor their commitments when fortune turns again." Blackwell's lips thinned. "Banking is business, Miss Collins, not charity." "And yet," Heath interjected, "a bank that ruins its customers soon finds itself without customers at all. Something to consider, perhaps." They left Blackwell sputtering behind his desk and stepped into the sunshine, both feeling lighter. "That was well done," Heath said admiringly as they walked down the street. "It needed saying," Lydia replied, "though I doubt it will change his ways." "Probably not, but you've honored your father and that matters." Heath squeezed her hand. "Now shall we share our news at the general store?" "Martha Stanley is the most efficient distributor of information in 3 counties." Lydia laughed. "A perfect plan." Sure enough, by supper time, the entire town knew of their engagement. Congratulations poured in, along with offers to help with wedding preparations. Even Harriet Wilson from the boarding house sent over a special apple pie with a note promising to bake the wedding cake as her gift. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of ranch work and wedding planning. Lydia ordered fabric for a new dress, and Heath arranged for a minister from Sacramento to perform the ceremony. as Pastor Thomas would be visiting family over Christmas. As December arrived, bringing cool weather and occasional rain, the ranch stood transformed from the struggling property it had been a year earlier. The barn roof had been completely replaced, the house repainted, and the herd had grown to 50 head of healthy cattle. They had hired 2 additional hands and built a proper bunkhouse to accommodate them. The night before their wedding, Lydia stood on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. The stars shone brilliantly overhead, and a sense of peace settled over her. Tomorrow, she would marry Heath in the small church in Angel's Camp, surrounded by friends and neighbors. The reception would follow at the ranch, with food and music and dancing until the small hours. Heath found her there, bringing a cup of hot cider and joining her at the railing. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, only half joking. "Not one," she replied honestly. "I was just thinking about my father, how much I wish he could be here tomorrow." Heath nodded, understanding in his eyes. "He'll be there in spirit, and I think he'd approve." "He would have liked you," Lydia said, leaning against his shoulder. "Straight-talking, hard-working, a man of your word. High praise." Heath wrapped an arm around her. "I promise to try to live up to it." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars and contemplating the future that stretched before them, a future built on mutual respect, shared goals, and deepening love. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with a thin layer of frost coating the grass and a pale winter sun rising in a cloudless sky. Lydia dressed in the new gown she had made cream-colored silk with lace trim, simple but elegant. Harriet Wilson and several other women from town helped with her hair and last-minute preparations. "You look beautiful, dear," Harriet said, adjusting the small wreath of evergreens and white berries that served as Lydia's headdress. "Your parents would be so proud." Lydia touched the locket at her throat, the one containing her parents' portrait, which she had chosen to wear instead of more elaborate jewelry. "Thank you, Harriet, for everything." The small church was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for Christmas, adding a festive atmosphere to the proceedings. Heath waited at the altar, looking handsome and slightly nervous in a new black suit. When Lydia entered on the arm of Thomas Pearson, who had offered to give her away, Heath's face lit up with such joy that she felt her heart might burst. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with traditional vows spoken in clear, confident voices. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Heath's kiss was gentle but full of promise, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. The reception at the ranch lasted well into the evening, with townspeople and neighboring ranchers joining in the celebration. There was food aplenty, music provided by local musicians, and dancing in the barn, which had been cleared and decorated for the occasion. Even Blackwell made a brief appearance, presenting them with a silver serving platter as a wedding gift, an unexpected gesture that suggested perhaps Lydia's words had made some small impact after all. As the party continued around them, Heath led Lydia outside for a moment of quiet. The winter night was cold but clear, the stars brilliant overhead. "Happy, Mrs. Anderson?" he asked, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Extremely, Mr. Anderson," she replied, smiling up at him. He reached inside his jacket and withdrew a folded document. "I have one more wedding gift for you." Puzzled, Lydia unfolded the paper. It was the deed to the ranch, but now it bore only her name. "Heath, what is this? We agreed to be equal partners, and we are in everything that matters." His eyes were serious. "But this land was your birthright, Lydia. I want it to be yours completely legally." "But you paid for it," she protested. "You saved it when I couldn't, and now I'm giving it to you." Heath's hands cupped her face gently, not as a gesture of charity or pity, but as a husband who wants his wife to have what rightfully belongs to her. I have everything I need in you and our life together." Tears filled Lydia's eyes at the depth of his generosity. "We'll share it as we share everything else, but I'll accept this gift in the spirit it's given." She stood on tiptoe to kiss him. "Thank you for understanding what this land means to me." "Always," he promised. They returned to the celebration hand in hand, secure in the knowledge that their partnership, now formalized in marriage, was built on the strongest foundation: mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that had grown naturally from the most unexpected of beginnings. Spring came early to Angels Camp in 1877, bringing gentle rains and warm sunshine that coaxed new life from the soil. The Collins Anderson Ranch flourished under its owner's care, becoming known throughout the county for its well-bred cattle and generous hospitality. Lydia and Heath settled into married life with an ease that surprised even them. Their complementary skills made ranch operations smooth, Lydia handling the accounts and gardening, Heath managing the cattle and hands. They made decisions jointly, respected each other's expertise, and found joy in building something lasting together. Their home expanded along with their operations. They added 2 rooms to the house, improved the barn, and constructed irrigation systems that would help them weather future droughts. The hands' quarters were upgraded, making the ranch an attractive place to work, and they rarely had trouble finding good men when they needed additional help. In late summer, as they celebrated their first year of marriage, Lydia shared news that brought Heath to happy tears. They would be welcoming a child in the early spring. The prospect of parenthood deepened their bond further, adding new dimensions to their plans and dreams. "Boy or girl, this child will inherit a legacy to be proud of," Heath said one evening as they sat on the porch, his hand resting gently on Lydia's growing belly. "A legacy of perseverance," Lydia agreed, "of finding hope when all seems lost, and of recognizing love when it appears in unexpected places," Heath added, pressing a kiss to her temple. The months passed in peaceful anticipation. The ranch continued to prosper, and Lydia's pregnancy progressed without complications. Heath became increasingly protective, taking on more physical tasks and insisting she rest frequently. Lydia complied with good grace, using her reduced workload to prepare the nursery and make baby clothes. In town, attitudes had shifted noticeably. Where once the Collins name had been whispered with pity, now it was spoken with respect. Even Blackwell had changed his approach to business, becoming marginally more flexible with struggling customers, though, whether from genuine enlightenment or fear of competition from the new bank that had opened in the neighboring town, remained unclear. On a bright March morning in 1878, after a relatively short labor, Lydia gave birth to a healthy son they named Joseph Heath Anderson, honoring both her father and his. The boy had Heath's blue eyes and the same determined set to his chin that both his parents shared. "He's perfect," Heath whispered as he held his son for the first time, awe in his voice. "He'll be strong like his father," Lydia said tiredly but happily from the bed. "And stubborn like his mother," Heath teased, earning a smile from his exhausted wife. Little Joseph thrived, bringing new joy to the household. Heath proved to be a natural father, as patient and gentle with his son as he was capable and firm with the ranch hands. Lydia recovered quickly from the birth, and soon found a comfortable rhythm that allowed her to care for her child while still participating in ranch operations. The years that followed brought continued prosperity and growth. A daughter, Elizabeth Grace, joined the family 2 years after Joseph, completing their family circle. The ranch expanded to include additional acreage purchased from a retiring neighbor, and their cattle operation became one of the most respected in the region. Through it all, Lydia and Heath maintained the partnership that had begun so unexpectedly. They faced challenges together: another drought, a difficult cattle market, the usual trials of raising children with the same determination and mutual support that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. On the 10th anniversary of Heath's arrival in Angel's Camp, they hosted a community celebration at the ranch. As the sun set over the prosperous land they had built together, Heath found Lydia watching their children play with the other youngsters. "Any regrets?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, shaking her head. "Not one. You?" "Only that I didn't ride into town sooner," he replied with a smile. "Think of all the time we could have had." "We have time enough," Lydia said, turning to face him. The years had added a few lines around her eyes, a touch of silver at her temples, but to Heath, she was more beautiful than ever. "And we've used it well." As they joined their guests for the evening's festivities, Lydia couldn't help but marvel at how completely her life had transformed. From the desperate young woman facing homelessness to a respected rancher, wife, and mother, her journey had been remarkable, all because a kind-hearted cowboy had recognized something in her worth fighting for. The deed to her father's ranch, now expanded and thriving, remained in her name, though she and Heath considered every aspect of their life a true partnership. It hung framed in their living room, a reminder of how their story began and the promise they had both kept to build something lasting together, founded on respect and deepened through love. And as the stars appeared over Angel's Camp, lighting the path of their future together, Lydia and Heath knew with absolute certainty that the home they had saved and the family they had created would endure for generations, to come a living testament to the power of second chances and unexpected beginnings.